Karen stole power from Black Man's home, regrets it when her ATV explodes. There was a pop, a hiss, and then a shriek so loud it rattled the wind chimes on my porch. I stepped out just in time to see smoke rising from the fence line, right where the orange extension cord had slithered over the night before. Karen Whitmore, my entitled next-door neighbor, stood in her backyard, flailing her arms like a startled flamingo, her Gucci slides no match for the sudden panic of watching her son's prized ATV go up in smoke. "Malik!" she screamed, voice cutting through the air. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't answer, just sipped my coffee. Calm, steady, watching the smoke rise from her backyard like karma itself had paid a visit. She didn't know yet, but that explosion was the result of exactly what she'd been warned about. 3 days ago, I noticed an odd drop in my solar inverter readings. I'm not talking about a glitch. I'm a systems engineer. I build power infrastructure for data centers and emergency hospitals. Electricity isn't just my job, it's what I live and breathe. And my home is basically a fortress of clean, efficient energy. Nothing happens without me knowing about it. So when my system logged a 1.8 kilowatt-hour dip at 2:13 a.m., I paid attention. At first, I assumed maybe one of the systems was kicking in automatically. Battery cycling, HVAC reboot, who knows? But when it happened again the next night, and again the night after that, always in that same window, I knew something was off. That's when I saw it. The orange cord, tucked just beyond the hedge line, looped over my fence, snaking toward Karen's property. It was subtle, deliberate, and it definitely wasn't there the day before. I followed it with my eyes as it disappeared behind my tool shed. You have to understand something about Karen. She's not the kind of neighbor who borrows sugar and says thank you. No, Karen is the kind of neighbor who complains about the color of your mulch and calls the HOA because your recycling bin is a few inches off the curb. She moved in after a nasty divorce, brought a bad attitude, a louder-than-life personality, and a sense of entitlement the size of a McMansion. Her teenage son had recently been gifted an obnoxiously loud, tricked-out electric ATV. No plates, no permit, just raw, unnecessary speed and a charging system that drew more power than a mini-fridge. And apparently they were charging it with my electricity. At first, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the kid didn't know the outlet was mine. Maybe they thought it was some shared power source. But deep down, I knew better. So I walked over the next day. Karen opened the door wearing designer yoga pants, a pink fleece hoodie that probably cost more than my electric bill, and holding a mimosa like she was brunch royalty. "Hey, Karen," I said, keeping it polite. "Just wanted to ask, has your son been using the outlet behind my shed by any chance?" She blinked behind oversized sunglasses. "Oh, that? Yeah, we figured it was no big deal. Just a quick charge while our garage panel gets looked at. You've got solar, right? You barely notice." I held back a breath. "It's not about whether I notice, it's about permission." She smiled, dismissive. "Come on, Malik. It's just a little juice. Lighten up." That's when I knew she wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending to be. And that's when the idea started forming. She had crossed a line, several, actually. And I don't believe in yelling. I don't believe in back-and-forth arguments with people who don't respect logic. I believe in systems, triggers, cause and effect. So I built her one. A fake outdoor outlet, strategically mounted on my side of the fence. It looked dusty, forgotten, carelessly left connected to my tool shed. But inside, it housed a smart impedance circuit wired to trip and send a voltage spike the moment someone pulled more than 3 amps. Safe for humans. Devastating for cheap Chinese ATV chargers. I even camouflaged a small camera nearby, disguised as a birdhouse, so I could catch the moment of impact. Then I waited. 3 nights passed. Then on the 4th night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I got the notification. Unauthorized draw detected. 2.9 kilowatt hours. Target threshold exceeded. I opened the feed. There he was, Karen's son. Shirtless, sleepy, plugging the orange cord into my outlet like he owned it. The screen glowed blue for a split second. Then, population, sizzle, darkness. The feed caught the flicker of panic in his eyes as smoke began curling from the ATV like something out of a Halloween-haunted house. And then came the scream. Back to the present, Karen stomped over to my fence, eyes wild. "You rigged your outlet. That's illegal. You endangered my son." I tilted my head. "Your son plugged into my private outlet. Without permission. Again. He could have been killed." "It was a non-lethal impedance trip," I replied. "Totally safe. Just not for thieves. You'll regret this, Malik." I leaned on the fence post, calm. "You already do, Karen." She stormed off, barking something into her phone. I had no doubt she'd be dialing the HOA or the police, or anyone who would listen to her tantrum. What she didn't know was this. I had footage, data logs, electrical reports. My backyard was a live forensic lab. But more importantly, she had just declared war, and I had more than enough voltage to fight back. The morning after the blowout, I expected some fallout. But I didn't expect a man in khakis and a smug grin knocking on my door before 10 a.m., clipboard in hand, polo tucked in like he was preparing for a round of golf rather than confronting a grown man over electricity. "You Malik Hayes?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." "HOA Safety and Compliance. I'm here because of a complaint regarding hazardous electrical modifications." I almost laughed. "Let me guess. Karen?" He didn't answer, just flipped his clipboard open like it was a badge. "Your neighbor claims you installed an illegal trap on your property, something that endangered her son and caused electrical damage to their property." I gestured toward the porch. "Why don't you come in? I'd love to walk you through what actually happened." He hesitated but followed. In my office, I queued up the footage, time-stamped clear as daylight. Karen's son sneaking into my yard, plugging in a cord. And then the pop. I explained the setup. "The outlet is on my property, wired to code. It only reacts when the draw exceeds 3 amps. It's called a surge impedance loop, harmless to people. But ATV chargers? That's a different story." He watched the footage with mild discomfort, clearing his throat. "This is pretty conclusive." "More than that," I said, sliding over the printouts of my system logs. "It's documented theft." He scratched his head. "Look, off the record, I don't think you're the bad guy here. But the HOA board's complicated. There's pressure to act when complaints pile up." "Right," I said. "And let me guess, Karen's complaints pile up faster than her empty wine bottles." He didn't smile, but his eyes said he agreed. I handed him a thumb drive. "Give this to whoever's pretending to be in charge. Logs, footage, and technical documentation. Oh, and let them know I have a JD cousin in DC and zero patience for weaponized bureaucracy." That afternoon, Karen was in full performance mode. She paraded around her yard on the phone, loudly lamenting the trauma her son had experienced. She claimed his emotional distress would cost thousands in therapy, that he could have been electrocuted, that this was attempted murder with a plug. I watched from my porch, one eyebrow raised, sipping sweet tea like it was a front-row seat to daytime TV. But by nightfall, I wasn't as amused, because tucked in my mailbox was a formal HOA violation notice. Same shiny gold seal, same legalese nonsense. "Unauthorized electrical hazard," it read. "Violation of Section 12A. accompanied by a fine, $500, and a mandatory inspection. So that's how they wanted to play it. I didn't waste time. I compiled everything: logs, photos, schematics. Then I drafted a formal letter of my own and sent it to the city building inspector, the local energy utility, and, just for fun, the Better Business Bureau. Karen wanted war. She was going to get it, but not the kind fought with insults and HOA memos. This war would be fought with precision, code, and accountability. What I didn't see coming, what genuinely surprised me, was what happened next. People started showing up. Not officials, not inspectors, neighbors. Tom, from 2 houses down, approached me while I was adjusting my solar meter. He looked hesitant, like he didn't want to admit something. "Hey, man, quick question. You ever notice your power flickering late at night?" "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Because our outdoor fridge's been losing chill overnight, and I thought it was just wear and tear. But then I saw your outlet camera. I saw that orange cord. We've had that same cord across our lawn twice. I just didn't think much of it." Next came Nancy, the woman with the immaculate flower beds and the quiet, watchful eyes. She said her garden lights reset randomly. "Always around 2 a.m., she said. "Same time every night." And then the Patels, who ran a catering business out of their garage. They'd lost a whole freezer load of food last month due to an unexplained breaker trip. One by one, people started asking the same thing. "Did Karen ever ask to use your outlet?" "No." "Did she use it anyway?" "Yeah, twice." Then came the nods, the looks of realization, the quiet, growing anger. I invited them into my garage, turned on the monitor wall, and showed them my system. The logs, the cameras, the surge data. "This isn't just about my house," I said. "She's been doing it across the block, leeching power wherever she can, hoping no one notices, hoping no one dares to speak up." Tom shook his head. "She used our RV hookup last month, while we were out of town. We found the cord, thought maybe it was landscapers." "She did it," I said, "and she's bold enough to report me to the HOA for defending myself." That night, we created a group chat. We called it Shocked by Karen. By midnight, it had 15 members. By the end of the week, 22. And the best part? We weren't just mad. We were organizing. The HOA thought they were dealing with a quiet, overly technical black man with solar panels. They didn't know I was building a coalition, a paper trail, a storm. They didn't know justice, when powered by a community, runs hotter than any faulty ATV charger. They would, soon. The third time Karen tried to steal electricity, I wasn't surprised. But what did surprise me was the level of shamelessness. After all the warnings, all the conversations, all the evidence, she still thought she could win. This time she didn't even bother hiding the cord. It dangled across the fence like a bright orange middle finger, plugged into the decoy outlet I'd built behind my shed. But unlike last time, the setup wasn't meant to just burn out her charger. It was meant to catch her red-handed. As soon as the voltage spike triggered, I got the alert on my phone. I pulled up the live feed just in time to watch her teenage son, Evan, leap back from the charger, waving smoke out of his face. The ATV sputtered, fizzled, then popped again, this time with a small puff of fire. It wasn't big, but it was dramatic enough that he dropped his phone and screamed. By the time Karen came running out in her silk robe and slippers, the backyard looked like a crime scene. The ATV's charger was fried. A black scorch mark streaked the side of their decorative retaining wall, and the smell, burnt plastic and ozone, lingered like guilt. "Malik!" she yelled across the fence, voice shrill with rage. "You tried to electrocute my son!" I stepped outside, calm as ever. "I warned you, twice. You wired a trap. That's illegal." You mean the legal outlet on my property that your son trespassed to use without permission? That trap? She clenched her jaw. This is criminal. Yeah, I said, and I've got the footage to prove who the criminal is. She stormed back inside without another word, dragging Evan by the wrist. He looked embarrassed more than anything else. His confidence had melted with the rubber insulation of that charger. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 hours later, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there were 2 uniformed officers standing on my porch. Mr. Malik Hayes. Yes. We received a report of a dangerous electrical device being used against a minor. Mind if we come in? I didn't flinch. Not at all. I led them into my workshop, queued up the camera footage, and gave them the full run-through. Every timestamp, every log entry, every data point that showed Karen's family tapping into my grid without consent. I even pulled up the HOA bylaws and my personal correspondence with Janice, the HOA secretary. After watching the footage twice, the younger officer leaned against the wall and exhaled. You weren't lying. Nope. The older cop scratched his chin. So let me get this straight. She stole your power. You warned her. She did it again. You set up a legal deterrent on your own property, and now she's trying to flip it on you. That about sums it up. He looked over at his partner. We're not filing anything. Agreed. I thanked them as they left, and from across the street, Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, a smug grin on her face, until the officers didn't walk over to her house. They drove off. Her smile vanished, but the twist wasn't over. Because that evening something even better happened. Tom, the guy with the backyard kitchen and the stone pizza oven, came knocking with a USB drive. You're gonna want to see this, he said. On it was nighttime footage from his security cam, dated 2 weeks earlier. Karen's son, sneaking through his side yard, running an extension cord to one of Tom's outdoor outlets. It matched the same time Tom's beer fridge tripped and ruined a $200 haul from the local brewery. You think this'll help? Tom asked. I grinned. It's more than help. It's ammo. The next day I called for a neighborhood meeting. Not HOA sanctioned, just a gathering on my lawn, under string lights powered exclusively by the sun. 23 neighbors showed up. Some brought folding chairs, others brought files. Turns out Karen had been drawing power from no fewer than 9 homes. One woman, Ms. Rodriguez, a widow who lived alone, told us her garden lights had been failing for weeks. I thought it was age, she said. Turns out it was theft. I took it all, notes, screenshots, statements. Then I compiled it into a clean, printable report titled Systematic Utility Theft and HOA Negligence, a community report, and I sent it to every member of the HOA board. Karen didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting an entire neighborhood, and for once she was outnumbered. The HOA clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, but that night it might as well have been a courtroom, and Karen, heels clicking against the laminate tile, arms stiff at her sides, was about to step onto the witness stand. I sat in the back with Tom, Miss Rodriguez, and 3 other neighbors. We came with USB sticks, printed reports, and more quiet resolve than I thought our block could ever muster. Karen didn't glance at us. She floated in like she owned the place, air-kissing Greg, the HOA president, as if this was some wine mixer and not the reckoning. Greg, bless his passive-aggressive heart, opened the meeting with his usual dull monotone. We're here to discuss ongoing concerns regarding electrical misuse, neighborly disputes, and community harmony. Karen smiled, the picture of martyrdom. Greg gestured toward her. Karen, you filed a report against Mr. Hayes. She stood up as if this were a TED Talk. Yes, I have been harassed, intimidated, and put in physical danger. My son was nearly electrocuted. Malik Hayes has installed dangerous traps. I fear for my safety." Gasps scattered across the room. I stayed quiet. Let her dig. Then Greg nodded to me. "Mr. Hayes." I stood calmly. "I have evidence that Karen Whitfield and her son have repeatedly tapped into my home's electrical grid without permission. And not just mine. 9 other homes have experienced power loss or suspicious activity. We have footage, logs, and official responses from the local police who investigated the matter." Karen laughed short and sharp. "This is absurd. You think I went around the neighborhood stealing power like some cartoon villain?" Tom stood. "Actually, yes. My outdoor kitchen fridge died the same night your son was caught on camera dragging a cord from my backyard." Ms. Rodriguez raised her hand. "My lights have been flickering for weeks." "Mine too," someone else added. Karen's voice cracked. "You people are ganging up on me. This is harassment." Greg cleared his throat. "Do you have any counter-evidence?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. I walked up to the projector and plugged in my USB. First video, Evan sneaking into my backyard, plugging the cord into the outlet. Time-stamped, night vision. Second video, the ATV exploding. Third, footage from Tom's yard, same kid, same cord. Then I laid the logs on the table. "According to HOA Bylaw 8B, I said, unauthorized utility access is a violation. Add to that municipal code violations and trespassing, and what we have here isn't a neighborly dispute. It's systemic theft." The room buzzed. Even Greg shifted uncomfortably. Karen stood. "This is ridiculous. I pay dues. That means I'm part of this community. Community resources should be available to everyone." "You think our private outlets are public property," Tom said. Her voice rose, shrill now. "I didn't mean it like that. My garage panel's been busted for weeks, and Evan needed to charge the ATV. What was I supposed to do?" "Ask," I said. "You ask." Greg finally spoke with something approaching a spine. "Karen, given the evidence presented and the pattern of behavior, the board will be issuing a temporary suspension of your HOA privileges. You're barred from using common areas until further review. We will also be notifying the local utility board and law enforcement for follow-up." Karen's face turned crimson. "You're siding with him?" "We're siding with the truth," Greg said. She stood frozen, like she couldn't compute that the room no longer bent to her. Then she spun on her heels, knocking over a folding chair with a clatter, and stormed out. Silence settled, broken only by the sound of someone whispering, "About time." But the real twist came after. As we packed up, Tom approached with a grin. "Check this out," he said, holding up his phone. On screen was a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had posted a long, dramatic screed accusing me of building weaponized power traps and calling for neighbors to stand up to techno-bullies. The comments didn't go her way. One neighbor replied, "Maybe stop stealing electricity." Another, "My kids said your son's been sneaking into people's yards." Not okay. And my personal favorite, "Girl, your HOA privileges got revoked. Sit down." I laughed, but the truth was, this wasn't over. Karen was humiliated, but she was also cornered, and people like her don't go down without one last messy attempt to claw their way back. I just didn't know how far she'd go yet. But I'd be ready. The next morning started with the thud of a heavy envelope hitting my doorstep. I opened the door to find a cream-colored envelope from the HOA, gold trim and all, like it was an invitation to some upscale suburban gala. Instead, it was a $750 fine for unauthorized electrical modifications, a threat of further penalties, and a notice of a mandatory inspection within the week. Karen wasn't just licking her wounds, she was retaliating. I held the paper in my hand for a long moment, then walked back into my office, flipped on the monitor, and opened my surveillance dashboard. Everything was still in place. The dummy outlet untouched, the logs unaltered. The trap hadn't been triggered since the HOA meeting. I was tempted to just let it go, but then I saw the little icon flashing red, a comment thread in the neighborhood's internal community forum. Karen had posted another rant. "Can we please talk about how certain people in this neighborhood are endangering our kids with homemade electric inventions? This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. My son has been traumatized, and this man is still installing devices in his backyard." There were a few likes from the usual suspects: Greg's wife, that woman with the 12 ceramic flamingos in her yard. But most responses weren't buying it. "Your son plugged into someone else's outlet," one neighbor wrote. "That's theft." "He didn't invent a death trap," another added. "He installed a breaker. Your son tripped it, twice." But then a comment stopped me cold. "My garden lights keep shorting out at night. At first I thought it was faulty wiring, but now I'm not so sure." It wasn't just me anymore. She hadn't stopped. That night I visited 3 more neighbors, checking their systems. And just like with mine, there were strange power dips around 2 a.m., identical patterns, identical loads. One woman, Mrs. Thomas, retired schoolteacher, barely 5 feet tall, looked at me with teary eyes and said, "I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't think someone could actually take power like that without me knowing." She wasn't alone. I created a group chat called Neighborhood Power Watch. Within hours, it had over a dozen members. People began sharing their stories. Garden outlets mysteriously left open, extension cords draped across fences, freezers that defrosted overnight. Even someone's fish tank filter had gone out randomly, killing 3 koi they'd had for 10 years. It all pointed to the same thing. Karen had expanded her operation, but now she wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat. Tom, always the calmest in our group, was the one who suggested the idea. "We need to get the city involved," he said. "Forget the HOA. Let's bring in someone who actually understands the law." We spent the weekend gathering everything: logs, footage, testimonies, even copies of power bills. I compiled it all into a single PDF, over 60 pages long. Then I submitted it to the City Utility Commission. What I didn't expect was for them to respond the very next day. A representative named Sandra Dawson called me directly. She'd reviewed the materials and was deeply concerned. She asked for access to my surveillance system under a confidentiality agreement and requested interviews with at least 5 neighbors. We set up a time for her to come to the block that same week, but Karen must have caught wind of it somehow. Because 2 nights before Sandra was due to arrive, my server went dark. I rushed to my office to find the screens frozen, all my security feeds disconnected. I tore open the cabinet. My external hard drive, where I kept the backup logs, was gone. Someone had broken in, but they didn't know me well enough, because I didn't just have one backup. I had 3. One stored off-site, one encrypted in the cloud, and one mirrored onto a hidden Raspberry Pi buried inside a fake sprinkler head in my yard. That night I watched the footage from the cloud backup. It was grainy in parts, but clear enough. Karen's son, Evan, hooded, carrying a pair of bolt cutters, hopping my side fence at 2:11 a.m. He walked straight to my shed, yanked open the panel, and snatched the hard drive. On his way out, he looked straight at the camera disguised inside the birdhouse. He smirked. I paused the frame. Print screen. I had him. The next morning, I filed a police report, this time with evidence of trespassing, theft, and tampering. I emailed Sandra Dawson again and updated her on everything. She thanked me and said she was bringing 2 additional investigators now. Karen had tried to delete the truth. She'd only made it bigger. And as her smokescreen started to fade, the people she'd manipulated, Greg, the board, even her few remaining allies, were about to find out that the fuse she lit wasn't just sparking in my backyard. It was burning toward the whole damn neighborhood. By the time Sandra Dawson from the City Utility Commission stepped onto our block, the air was already electric, with tension, with anticipation, and with the unmistakable hum of reckoning. She arrived in an unmarked gray sedan, professional in demeanor, clipboard in hand, and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Behind her came 2 colleagues, both engineers by the look of their tools and measuring devices. They weren't here for neighborhood politics. They were here for proof. And we had plenty. I guided Sandra and her team through my system setup first. Solar panel array, inverter logs, backup battery charts, and the entire server setup that Karen's son had attempted to sabotage. Then came the surveillance footage, complete with timestamps of multiple nights, and most importantly, Evan scaling my fence and stealing the drive. Sandra leaned forward as she watched the clip, pausing just as Evan's face lit up in the infrared lens of the birdhouse cam. "That's criminal trespassing," she said flatly, "and tampering with private electrical infrastructure, not to mention theft of power, which puts this squarely in felony territory." I nodded. "And I'm not the only one." By the end of the day, Sandra had visited 7 homes on our street. Each one had a story. Mrs. Thomas's flickering porch lights, Tom's freezer failures, the Patels' shorted-out catering fridge. Each of them had experienced some version of what I had, energy being siphoned, unknown to them, through outdoor outlets and garden lines. But it was Sandra's next question that raised the stakes. "Have any of you seen where the cords actually originate or terminate from Karen's house?" No one had. Not clearly. She was careful. Or more accurately, Evan was. But I remembered something. "Hang on," I said, digging through one of my side folders. I pulled up the footage from Nancy's yard. She'd allowed me to place one camera near her shed, angled just enough to catch the alley behind our homes. It wasn't perfect, but in 3 separate clips, the same hooded figure appeared around 2 a.m., dragging a thick orange extension cord along the fence line. In the last clip, he vanished behind Karen's backyard gate. Sandra's eyes narrowed. "We're going to need a formal inspection warrant," she said, "and I think we just got the grounds for one." The next 3 days passed like a pressure cooker set on simmer. Karen must have felt the shift because she stopped with the theatrics. No HOA complaints. No passive-aggressive posts, not even any screaming fits from her yard. It was almost quiet. Too quiet. Then on Friday morning, it happened. A squad car parked outside her house just after sunrise, alongside a city utility enforcement van. 2 uniformed officers and 3 inspectors in dark jackets stepped out. We watched from behind curtains and blinds as they knocked on Karen's door. It took her 5 minutes to answer, another 10 before she was yelling, "I don't consent to a search. This is harassment. Where's your warrant?" One of the officers calmly handed her the papers. She tried slamming the door until they reminded her that refusal at this point would be obstruction. 30 minutes later, they emerged with what looked like a spiderweb of extension cords hidden behind lattice panels, fake planters, even one buried in mulch. One had been split and spliced, dangerously, running into a junction box in her neighbor's garden gnome. Sandra turned to the press. Yes, the press had arrived by then. Word had gotten out fast, and simply said, "This is an ongoing investigation into coordinated utility theft. Evidence suggests long-term intentional misuse of private residential power. We are cooperating with local law enforcement." Karen's face, as she was photographed, standing in her driveway in pink slippers and a hoodie, was a picture I wouldn't forget for a long time. But the most satisfying part came later. Sandra called an emergency HOA meeting that evening and requested the entire neighborhood attend. Not just the board members, everyone. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs filled every inch of the room, and people were even standing near the snack table. I saw Mrs. Thomas near the front, arms folded. The Patels looked tense. Even Greg showed up, but this time he didn't sit beside Karen. Sandra stood at the podium. "What we have here," she began, "isn't just a violation of electrical code, it's a breach of trust." Then she laid it all out. The logs, the footage, the eyewitness reports, and the devices recovered from Karen's property. She siphoned over 3,400 kilowatt hours over a period of 4 months, Sandra said. That's equivalent to more than $1,200 in stolen energy from multiple homes. Karen stood up then. She tried to talk. "They're lying. They've always been against me. You all just want to paint me as some kind of villain because I—" Sandra held up a hand. "The state doesn't care about neighborhood drama, Ms. Whitmore. We care about theft. And you are being referred to the district attorney's office." Dead silence. Greg cleared his throat. We'll be reviewing her standing with the HOA in a closed vote." "No need," someone said from the back. "Let's vote now." And just like that, a spontaneous, unanimous decision. Karen was suspended indefinitely from all HOA privileges. Her fines stacked, her vote stripped. But the most poetic part? Her ATV, the symbol of all this chaos, was towed that same weekend. Not for evidence, for auction. To help repay the restitution she now owed. As the room cleared, neighbors came up to me one by one, shaking my hand, clapping my shoulder, thanking me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about standing up for each other. For the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pride. Not just in my system, not just in catching a thief, but in my neighborhood, and in the power of one person refusing to be quietly robbed. 3 weeks after the emergency HOA meeting, the neighborhood had a new rhythm. One without the sudden blackout blips, the late-night ATV engine revs, or the endless sound of Karen yelling on the phone about bylaws and persecution. But just as peace seemed to settle in, something unexpected shook the calm. I was in the middle of wiring a tamper-proof outlet box for the Patels when a dark SUV pulled into my driveway. 2 sharply dressed individuals stepped out, badges visible, no smiles. They introduced themselves as investigators from the office of the county prosecutor. "We're here because Ms. Karen Whitmore has filed a formal countersuit," said the man, flipping open a folder. "She's alleging malicious targeting, intentional sabotage of personal property, and harassment." I stared at him. "She filed that after being caught stealing power from half the neighborhood?" The woman investigator stepped forward. "Her legal counsel is arguing that while there may have been utility misuse, your response was disproportionate and dangerous." "Disproportionate," I repeated. "She had cords running through flower beds into 3 different yards." "She claims," the woman added carefully, "that your surge trap was a premeditated attack." I let out a breath, kept my tone calm. "Then I suggest you follow me inside. I'll show you what real premeditation looks like." I walked them through every step again. The schematics, the photos, the footage, the time-stamped voltage logs. I showed them the original surge trap setup, how it was designed to trip safely under high draw without posing any risk to people or pets. I even pulled up the energy audit analysis from Sandra's team. Then I showed them the neighborhood group chat, the reports, the damage, and finally the footage of Evan stealing the surveillance drive, a move so sloppy and incriminating that even the male investigator's mouth twitched in disbelief. By the end, they were quiet. "We'll include this in the report," the woman said. "I'll be honest with you. This is the kind of claim that tends to fall apart under scrutiny, but we have to investigate it formally. I nodded. Understood, but I'm not backing down. If she wants to play legal games, she's going to find out I play them by the rule book, line by line. As they left, I noticed Karen peeking out from behind her blinds. She ducked quickly, but not before I saw her pale face. The next day, I met with a civil attorney named Russell Price. Tom had recommended him, retired Air Force, now specializing in small claims and community disputes. I handed him a thick binder of everything I'd compiled. "You did half my job already," he said, flipping through the pages. "And honestly, I've seen nuisance countersuits like this. They're like fireworks. Loud at first, but they fizzle fast if you have structure." "Think it'll go anywhere?" I asked. "Not unless her lawyer's looking to lose a bar license." We filed a response immediately, not only denying Karen's claims but attaching our own counterclaim: defamation, property damage, and false police reporting. Karen's stunt with the cops hadn't been forgotten. Then came the real twist. 2 days later, Gwen, the new HOA president, called me to an impromptu board meeting. When I arrived, she was sitting with 2 other members, all looking grim. "We got a letter," she said, sliding it across the table. "Anonymous. But it claims Karen's been using her position on previous subcommittees to cover up multiple violations." My eyes narrowed. "Cover up how?" "She allegedly manipulated report logs, rewrote citations, and influenced at least one vote involving her own property complaints," Gwen explained. "We're bringing in an external audit to review past board activity." "Let me guess," I said. "Greg's name is going to pop up." She nodded. "It already has." The audit launched that week. What came out was worse than expected. Karen hadn't just stolen power. She had manipulated her HOA privileges to shield herself from consequences. She'd dismissed valid complaints, altered meeting minutes, even forged a signature once on a violation waiver. When the news broke to the neighborhood, it didn't cause rage. It caused something more devastating to Karen: rejection. Neighbors stopped responding to her waves. Parents wouldn't let their kids near her yard. Greg, now fully exposed, quietly resigned and moved out within a month. But the one thing that landed like a thunderclap: the city announced that it would be pursuing criminal utility theft charges after all. Sandra had pushed through the data, and with the mounting neighborhood testimonies, the DA's office finally moved. Karen was served a subpoena. I watched from my porch that morning as she opened the envelope. For the first time, I saw her legs nearly give out. Evan rushed outside to steady her. But even he looked unsure, less bratty, more shaken. She didn't yell. She didn't call the police. She just stood there, reading the words that would seal her downfall. Later that night, as the sun dipped low and my motion lights clicked on, I checked my energy monitor one last time. All clear. No phantom draws. No voltage dips. Just peace. But it wasn't the absence of cords that made me breathe easier. It was the knowledge that even when the system fails, good people can fix it. Together. One wire, one truth, one act of resistance at a time. The courtroom was packed. Not with cameras or press. This wasn't that kind of trial. But with neighbors. People who had stood by silently for years, now lining the pews like a small-town congregation, ready for justice. Even Gwen from the HOA was there, sitting near the back, arms folded tightly across her chest. Karen entered last, flanked by her attorney, face pale, hair no longer blown out into the perfect HOA bob. Her walk lacked the bounce it used to have. She didn't even acknowledge anyone in the room. She kept her eyes on the floor until she reached the defendant's table. She was being arraigned on charges of utility theft, falsifying HOA records, and making a false police report. Misdemeanors stacked like bricks. It wasn't prison time, but it was enough to strip her of whatever social clout she had left. The judge, A lean man in his 50s with a clipped tone and little patience wasted no time. "Ms. Whitmore, you've been charged with knowingly and repeatedly using electricity not belonging to you, tampering with neighborhood documentation, and filing a knowingly false complaint to law enforcement. How do you plead?" Karen glanced at her lawyer. "Not guilty," she whispered. Murmurs filled the courtroom. The prosecution was ready. They opened their folder and rolled out everything: the voltage logs, the surveillance footage, the technical reports I'd submitted, the testimonies from the Patels, Nancy, Tom, and others. Each document was precise, each video clip damning. And then, as the real twist of the day, the prosecutor called a surprise witness: Evan, Karen's own son. He shuffled to the stand in an oversized hoodie, hands in his lap, unable to make eye contact with his mother. When asked under oath, he admitted to plugging into neighbors' outlets. He said it had been his mom's idea. She called it borrowing juice and said no one would notice. He had just followed orders. Karen visibly crumbled in her chair. That was the crack in the dam. She didn't cry, but her shoulders slumped, her hands clenched, and for the first time she looked like someone who finally understood the weight of what she'd done. In the end, she took a plea deal. Fines, community service, mandatory restitution to affected neighbors. The judge also recommended permanent removal from all HOA involvement. It wasn't prison, but it was public, thorough, and humiliating. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. I stood with Gwen, Tom, and a few others. No cheering, no gloating, just relief. "She could have just asked," Gwen said quietly. I nodded. She could have respected people's boundaries. That's all it would have taken. Tom chuckled. "Bet she regrets not listening the first time you warned her." "Oh," I said, smiling, "she regrets a lot more than that now." That night, back in the neighborhood, things felt different. Kids played in front yards again. People waved longer. Someone dropped off a plate of brownies at my door with a sticky note that said, "Thanks for wiring the truth." I sat on my porch and watched the sun go down, the same way I had at the beginning of all this. The air smelled cleaner, lighter. The birdhouse cameras were still up, but I hadn't checked the feeds in days. No cords had slithered across my fence since the trial. No mysterious energy dips in my logs. Just peace. Karen's house was dark. The once buzzing patio lights were gone. No more midnight karaoke. No ATV revving. Evan had taken to biking instead. Quiet, slow rides that looked more like reflection than rebellion. A few weeks later, she came to my door. She wasn't dressed in her signature athleisure this time, just jeans and a worn sweater. Her voice was low. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she said, "but I wanted to say thank you. For not going further. For not dragging me worse than I already dragged myself." I didn't say anything. She sighed. "I was wrong. All of it. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to admit it. I thought I could bend the rules to fit my life. I didn't think about what it was doing to everyone else." I nodded slowly. "It's not about bending rules. It's about respect." "I see that now," she said. Then she added, "I'm moving. Figured a fresh start is the only honest thing I can do." "Maybe that's best," I said. She turned and walked away. Weeks passed. Karen did move. The new neighbors were a young couple with a baby on the way and a love for gardening. First thing they did, ask me if they could borrow a voltage meter. And just like that, the neighborhood came full circle. No more fear of leaching cords. No more HOA drama. Just a community that had learned what it meant to stand up, not with anger, but with quiet resilience. To those of you watching, if there's anything this story proves, it's this. Never underestimate the power of truth, or the voltage of a man who knows his way around a circuit board. If you enjoyed this story and believe in standing up for what's right, no matter how small the battle, Support this channel. Subscribe, share, and help us tell more stories where everyday people remind the world that justice isn't always loud, but it is always possible. Until next time, stay grounded and never steal electricity from an engineer.